everyone. Welcome back to Bible Discoveries, the weekend show. We are taking a look at our weekly assigned reading. We are recapping it, get you caught back up if you've fallen behind, or test your memory if you have kept up with the weekly reading. And we are answering your questions that you have sent to us and reading some of your comments from the comment section on YouTube and also from our email. So thank you so much for interacting with us here on the program. I really, really do appreciate it. My name's Corie. If this is your first time here, I'm normally here with my husband, Matlock, but instead I've kept on our special guest from last week, my mom. I know her as Mom. You can know her as Janice. Hi, Mom.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be joining with you today. This is a lot of fun.
It's good. So nice. And it's springtime. It's Easter time.
Look at
so
the
I have
flowers.
my beautiful mom on with me to celebrate spring. Although in Canada, spring is always a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Yes. It hasn't quite arrived yet.
Yeah.
Not
There's
yet.
snow, there's ice, then there's warm weather, then there's snow, then there's rain, then there's mud. It's a thing.
On the calendar, it's spring,
Yes.
but it just doesn't feel like that yet. That's okay.
We got to get there eventually.
It'll come. It'll come.
Speaking about getting there eventually, what we are recapping today, what we were supposed to read, is 2 Samuel 11 to 1 Kings 8. And then on Sunday, we are supposed to read Psalm 46 to 49. Okay, so same structure, Mom. I'm going to be recapping 2 Samuel 11 to 1 Kings 8. Interrupt me, please, if you want to stop and talk about a section. Let's do it.
All
Let's
right.
jump in. Okay, 2
Okay.
Samuel 11. Do you remember what happened in the first chapter of your reading this week? It's actually really bad. While Joab and the army of Israel were out defeating the Ammonites, David has an affair with a married woman. And he knew that Bathsheba, this woman, was the wife of one of his mighty men. So a special designation given to the greatest, most loyal warriors in his military, who was currently out in battle. But David chooses to have this affair anyway. It's a horrible betrayal. Later on, she sends David a message that she's pregnant, and he tries to cover his tracks by calling her husband Uriah back from the battlefront, but Uriah is too faithful. He's like, I'm just going to camp outside the palace. I'm not going to have the comforts of my home because my brothers in arms are out there fighting. I'm not going to be comfortable. So it doesn't work. So David sends Uriah back to the battlefield with a letter telling Joab to have Uriah killed in battle. Go charge the gates of the city, and then everyone back away, but keep Uriah there. Kill him. Joab has no idea what Uriah has done, but he trusts David and he follows through. Then after Bathsheba has finished mourning for Uriah, David marries her and brings her into his harem at the palace. But verse 27 says, the thing David had done displeased the Lord. Yeah, I think so. 2 Samuel chapter 12, Nathan the prophet comes to rebuke David, and David accepts the rebuke. He knows it's really bad. And there's a prediction of Absalom's rebellion because of David's sin. It says, the sword will never leave your house. And the son who had just been born, he's going to die. So there's this horrible, David had enacted violence, and now violence was going to be enacted on David's household. Bathsheba does have another son. They name him Solomon, but God gives him a special name, Jedediah. We're told that Joab does successfully capture Rabbah of the Ammonites. It's a city, and David travels there, and there's this scene where he takes the crown of the Ammonite king and he places it on himself. 2 Samuel chapter 13, and this is where David's household starts to fall apart, and where we learn that Deuteronomy 17 was right all along, that kings should not multiply wives because it goes bad. It goes bad. Amnon, David's firstborn son, so culturally who would have been looked at as the crown prince, even though God renaming Solomon had said, nope, Solomon's going to be the crown prince. Culturally, Amnon, this firstborn of David, he assaults his half-sister Tamar, a daughter of David, by the Geshurite princess. So she's Israelite royalty and Geshurite royalty, her future role would have been to have been married off in a marriage alliance with another nation. She would have been a political tool, essentially. That would have been her job. But because she's assaulted by her brother, it ruins this. Absalom, her full brother, who is David's third-born son, he brings Tamar to live with him. And David was furious that this happened, that Amnon assaulted her. But apparently no reparations were made to Tamar and no punishments were given to Ammon. He didn't lose his place, but Tamar lost her purpose, her role in the family, and her home. 2 years later, furious over this, Absalom has Amnon killed, and then he flees back to Geshur because he's a prince of Geshur and a prince of Israel. So he goes back to Geshur, to his maternal grandfather, the king of Geshur. And David mourns for Amnon. He wants Absalom back. So he doesn't hate Absalom for this. So either David understands why Absalom did this, or he didn't want to lose his peace treaty with Geshur, or both.
Or both.
Depends on how cynical you want to be about David. I think it's probably both. Mm-hmm. I think he probably understands where Absalom is coming from. He probably feels bad that he didn't do anything about it, recognizing his own faults. And also, it would be really bad for him to lose his peace treaty with Geshur. Okay, 2 Samuel 14. Joab, the commander of the army, nephew of David, sets up a false scenario in order to convince David to give Absalom a pardon and bring him back from Geshur. He sees that David is miserable, so David does this. But the catch is, he can come live in Jerusalem, but he is not allowed to see David. David still distances himself. But 2 years later, Absalom demands an audience with Joab and David, and he's ultimately forgiven. He's brought back. This seems nice, except we're going to learn later that this is part of a takeover ploy by Absalom. He knows he needs to get pardoned by his father to be accepted back into Jerusalem because he's planning a takeover. 2 Samuel 15, Absalom spreads the seeds of doubt about the ability of David to lead Israel amongst the people. And it's very interesting that it works. It says something about David's leadership. He's a really good warrior, maybe less so of a social leader, because these seeds of doubt set in. They grow. Doesn't make it right. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's interesting that it works so easily.
Worked. Yes. Yeah.
Absalom acts charismatically. He acts lovingly toward all the people, so the people love Absalom. They fall in love with him. And 4 years into the ploy, Absalom hosts this gathering at Hebron, a very important city, and he declares himself king. Remember, Hebron was the first royal city of Judah. That's where David ruled for 7 years. David, his family, his officials, his bodyguards, and an attachment of Philistine soldiers, which is really interesting, and their families who are loyal to David, leave Jerusalem. But David leaves 10 of his concubines to take care of the palace. This is where we learn that David also has concubines. More peace treaties. David. We're also told that some of the priests and officials who are loyal to David stay in Jerusalem as spies. So we've got some palace intrigue happening here. 2 Samuel 16, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, tells David that Mephibosheth is not loyal. And as a result, David grants all of Mephibosheth's land to Ziba. David's getting paranoid now. Mm-hmm. Who else is against me? Who's conspiring with Absalom? All my sons have gone against me. Like there's this. And Shimei, a relative of Saul, curses David as David's leaving, saying that God has done this to you, David, because you're a murderer. Now, Shimei means of Saul's household, probably. But David knows that he is a murderer of Uriah. He's not entirely wrong, but this is exceptionally nasty. And David's response to Shimei is interesting. He says, maybe you're right. We'll see what God does. Maybe God will bring me back. Maybe God will forgive me. David's men want to kill Shimei, and David says, don't do it. Don't kill him. Maybe he's right. we're told that Absalom incorporates his father's concubines, I'm going to say it nicely, incorporates his father's concubines into his harem to secure the rebellion. So he's declaring that he's fully king. David's not coming back. David has no more harem. This is my harem now. There's no going back. 2 Samuel 17, we've got two advisors. Ahithophel is an advisor loyal to Absalom who's giving good advice. Hushai is an advisor, but he's secretly loyal to David, so he's giving bad advice. So Ahithophel, he's like, you need to go catch David right now. Right now. Everyone's tired. This is your only opportunity. Send men after them. Get them now, right now. Hushai's like, no. You need to gather all the assembly of Israel, and together the assembly of Israel needs to go get David, because Hushai wants to give David time to get out. Mm-hmm. And Hushai must be really convincing, because Absalom chooses Hushai's bad advice. So the spies send word to David, he's safe, but you need to get out of the country still quickly. Ahithophel, who's loyal to Absalom, he can see the writing on the wall. He knows a conspiracy when he sees one. He's a wise man after all. So unfortunately, he commits suicide because he knows it's a matter of time before David comes back and he gets executed. Okay, so then we see Absalom and the army of Israel pursuing David. We find out that Amasa, another one of David's nephews, is the commander of Absalom and Israel's army. Joab and David's other nephew are still the commander of David's army. So this is really a family affair. 2 Samuel 18, David and co, they've hunkered down at the city of Menahem, which is in northern Israel. And he sends out his army in 3 units to fight Absalom, but he commands everyone, be gentle with Absalom. And miraculously, because they're outnumbered, David's men win. But Joab, always looking out for David, even when it means going against David's own advice, kills Absalom. He's done with this. He's like, there's too much conspiracy. Oh, we're done here. And he kills Absalom against David's orders. David receives news of the victory, but he immediately goes into mourning over Absalom. We see, like, David, I think David knows that this is all his fault. He remembers the prophecy. He remembers. 2 Samuel 19, Joab snaps David out of it for the sake of the fighting man. He's like, David, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose all the people who are loyal to you. So David goes out and he honors his men. They go back to Jerusalem. David promises Amasa. He promises Amasa, who is the commander of Absalom's rebellious army, that he can have Joab's job as the commander of the army. And this works. Amasa is like, all right, guys, make way. The king is coming back. David goes back to Jerusalem. And this is where Mephibosheth is still there. And he's like, Uncle David, not really uncle, Father David, whatever he calls him.
Yes.
Ziba double-crossed me. I was never against you. And David splits the land because he's not sure who to believe between the two of them. 2 Samuel 20, there's another rebellion against David. See how, like, David really loses control at the end of his reign. Yeah. Sheba, a Benjamite, rebels against David, and there's unrest because when David returned to Jerusalem and kingship, he seems to have been favoring his own tribe of Judah, which, I mean, fair enough. Everyone's trying to kill you and take your place as king. So if you're going to favor a tribe, it's probably going to be the one that has incentive to keep you as king, right? Mm-hmm. David tells Amasa to go muster a military force to fight this new rebellion, but Amasa doesn't come back in the allotted time. So David sends his nephew Abishai to Joab to quickly go deal with Sheba. And when they come across Amasa, you know what happens. Mm-hmm. You know it's predictable. Joab kills him. He kills him. Gone. And then goes on to pursue Sheba. And this is where we see this really interesting wise woman of Abel Beth-Maachah, where Joab surrounds this territory because the traitor has gone into this city. And he's like, okay, I guess we're going to have to take down this city. And the wise woman's like, hey, is Joab there? And they send Joab to the wall. And she's like, why are you trying to destroy? We are a mother in Israel. This city is a mother in Israel. What are you doing? And Joab's like, well, okay, I don't want to destroy you, but Sheba, Sheba is in here. She's like, okay, I'll throw his head over.
Give me a minute.
Give me a minute. And the people take her advice and they throw the head of Sheba over the wall. And the rebellion is over. 2 Samuel 21, there's a 3-year famine. And this turns out, when David inquires of God, this turns out to be God's judgment on Saul for breaking the peace treaty that Israel had with the Gibeonites. And so David goes to the Gibeonites. He has to, in order to make this right, he has to submit Israel, because Israel's broken the covenant. So he has to submit Israel to the requests of the Gibeonites. And the Gibeonites demand the execution of 7 descendants of Saul at Saul's hometown of Gibeah. So David does it. He executes 7 grandsons of Saul. And the mother of 2 of those men, her name was Rizpah, and she stays with the bodies and keeps them from being eaten by birds or wild animals, because they've exposed the bodies, which was culturally the most horrible thing that you could do to dead bodies, because it's seen as a judgment that you are food for the animals. So she keeps the animals away by day and by night. And David hears about this, and as a result, he takes the bones excuse me, I'm stumbling on my words now, the bones of Saul and his sons that had been buried, and he gives them a proper royal burial. 2 Samuel 22, there's a song of David here that's recorded. It's almost identical to Psalm 18. I don't know if you caught that. Psalm 18 is probably this exact song that has just been slightly altered for later use in Solomon's temple. Okay, 2 Samuel 23, this is David's last words written in poetic form. And there's obviously, guys, David wasn't perfect. We see the results of his sin. We see the results of his life. But he was faithful to God. He did not engage in idolatry. Not physical idolatry. There were times where he listened to his own words rather than God's and then repented truly. Didn't give excuses like Saul did. We're also told some of the exploits of David's warriors in their organization. So there was 3 most prominent ones, then there was the commander of the 3, then there was the 30, then the head of his bodyguard. It's interesting if you're interested in ancient warfare. It's a good chapter to check out. 2 Samuel 24. God is angry with Israel. And so the Bible says he incited David against them. Okay. This is the kind of action that God could have stopped with one of the prophets. And this is what I think the Bible means. David wants to conduct an unlawful census. God easily could have sent Nathan, could have sent Gad in there to be like, David, don't do it. But God doesn't. This is like a test, right? That David fails. He wants to conduct an unlawful census of the fighting men. Let me see what the military power is that we have. Joab resists him, gets all the army commanders, no, David, we can't do this. This is unfaithful to the Lord. But David ultimately was like, no, I'm the king. You're doing what I say. So they do. And here's where the prophet comes in. Then God sends the prophet Gad to tell David that he's sinned, and he gives him 3 options for punishment. What do you choose, David? 3 years of famine, 3 months of losing in battle, or 3 days of plague? And David asks God to choose between the famine or the plague. God chooses the plague, 3 days of plague, and David asks God for the punishment to fall on him and his family. David is then, he asks for, how do I stop this? David's given instructions to build an altar to God on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, in Jerusalem. So David buys it. It's up on what is now the Temple Mount, builds on it, sacrifices, and the plague is stopped. It's really interesting.
And it's also interesting, too, where David, when he's given those choices, and we see in verse 14, and David said to Gad, who is the prophet that came to tell him, give him the choices, I am in great distress, David says. Please let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great. So you see where David's heart is at, right? And then he says, but do not let me fall into the hands of man.
Mm-hmm.
So David knows that God will bring it to a close when justice has been met. Whereas with men always take it too far.
You're right. And it's interesting to reflect at this point in David's life, as I'm sure he had a lot of time to reflect as a king who is now no longer going out to war, about his beginning and Saul's end, but then also the height of David's power when his strength was growing, and some of those decisions that he made in the treaties that he made and the marriage alliances, and then his great sin, and how mankind, the people around him, even his family, had tried to kill him for that. But God had brought him back. And that's so interesting for David, because when he's leaving and he's being taunted by Shimei, who's like, God's doing this to you because you're a murderer. David doesn't say, no, I'm not.
Right.
He's like, we'll see what God's going to do.
Yeah.
God is my judge. We'll see what God is going to do. And maybe you're right. Maybe God is exiling me and I'm going to die. Maybe you're right.
Yeah.
But David knew that God had chosen Solomon as the next king of Israel. So there would have been the same passiveness. I think mankind would have seen it as passiveness. So I'm saying passiveness, but I think it's resolve from David. The same resolve that David had to not kill King Saul, to put Saul in this judgment place of God. I'm not going to kill Saul, God. If you want me to be king, if you want to judge Saul, you have to do it. The same restraint he showed there, the same passiveness, is the same passiveness we see David doing with his own life. He doesn't stay in Jerusalem and try to resist Absalom. He leaves Jerusalem willingly and in mourning. And we see that with Shimei. He's like, we're going to see. I'm putting myself in the hands of God, and God will decide. And he begs God for mercy. Like we see Psalm 51. We see all of these Psalms of David where he's like, I still have hope because I know who you are. But I'm also not going to deny my sin. I know that I'm evil. I know that I've done these things, and I love you. And it's David never tried to go after other gods to get power.
That's right.
He never did that. He knew who God was, and he knew who he was in relation to God, which was underneath.
And you see that even from a young boy with the whole Goliath scenario, because he was a boy with a slingshot and stones in his pouch. And you have the entire army of these strong men, even his older brothers were in there. And they were terrified. But he went in with the resolve of, he knew himself that it was God that when a lion or a bear would attack his sheep, God gave him the strength. God gave him the ability. So he grew up on that and then watched all these years knowing that he had been anointed for the kingship, but watching Saul and all of the devastation that would come to Saul. And Saul became that paranoid. It was always about, you read it and you're thinking, Saul, grow up. Because he would say to his men, you don't care about me. You don't care about me. Somebody needs to care about me. And it was this paranoia that grew that David watched and always put himself in the hands of God, in the mercy of God, even when the child that was conceived between David and Bathsheba, God had told him that that child was going to die. David was in mourning and in prayer the whole time that child was sick. The Bible even says his staff, the people around him, were so concerned for him because he wasn't eating, he wasn't washing, he wasn't anointing himself. And they thought, oh no, we don't even want to tell David that the child has died because what's going to happen now? And when David heard about the child dying, he cleaned himself up. He ate, he anointed himself with oil, and they asked him, and he said, as long as my I'm paraphrasing it,
Yeah.
but as long as the boy was alive, I could appeal to God.
Mm-hmm.
But God has now taken him. The judgment has come. God has made his decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I will
Accept it.
accept it.
Because he is king.
He is king.
David always,
Exactly.
except for like a couple of times where he stepped over the line, which is very impressive for an ancient king that it was only a couple of times, because most of the kings, it was all the time
Yeah.
that they
Yes.
stepped out from under the authority of God and acted as if they were the authority, when the whole time they're not, but they're acting as if, and it's God showing the restraint, and then he brings judgment, right? Where, yeah, it's so interesting where we see this is why God chose David to be king, because he knew he wasn't going to be perfect, but he was going to give this example of truly keeping God as the authority and what
Yes.
that means.
Serving.
Mhm.
He took care of his father's sheep.
Mm-hmm.
David was that shepherd over that flock, and that
Mhm.
was his responsibility. And he learned how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And much in the same way, he saw God as king,
Mm-hmm.
as the head shepherd, and
Mm-hmm.
he as king of Israel was to take care of God's people. They weren't
Mhm.
his people.
Mm-hmm.
They were God's people.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different attitude. And even here with Joab, when Joab's, don't do this census, I think in David's mind was, Joab, you've gone against me before. Your word is nothing
How do
to
I
me
trust
right now.
you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is my decision and I'm going for it.
Uh-huh.
But yet, in the end, it wasn't right. He knows it. And now he's putting himself back into the hands of God rather than the hands of men.
Mm-hmm.
Because men all along have gone against him.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. Like, Joab is such an interesting character because I think Joab was loyal to David and David's house without fault. But he didn't always accept David's judgments. He did not submit himself to David's judgments as king. There was several times where he was like, I don't think you know what's best for you. So I'm going to do it.
I'm going to do this.
I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always out of loyalty to David, except for the first one. The first one was out of loyalty to his brother.
Yes.
But it was out of loyalty to David, I think, mostly. Like, I'm going to kill Abner because you can't trust this guy. I'm going to kill Absalom because you can't trust this guy. You're going to trust this guy? We're not going to trust this guy, And he wouldn't do that. And we're going to see Joab goes a little bit too far and gets himself, ultimately meets his end because of it.
And that's what David recognizes.
Mm-hmm.
Men always take it too far.
Yes.
Human beings.
Yes.
We always take it too far, but God is perfect.
Yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
1 Kings 1. We're going to do a few chapters of 1 Kings. So due to his age and his failing health, David can't stay warm. So they bring a woman essentially into his household, into his harem, but he's not like consummating the marriage with her or anything. She's just keeping him warm. I'm mentioning it because she comes up later. This is why the Bible is mentioning it as well. We learn that Adonijah, David's fourth born son, he wanted to be king. And he had hired a military entourage to proclaim those kingly intentions while David was still alive. So Adonijah doesn't want to rebel against David. So he's doing what in the modern world we would call a soft launch of his kingship. He's like, let's test the waters. Dad's still alive. But instead of asking Dad, I'm just going to announce it in Jerusalem and see what happens. See if I get a... But from the way that David has been handling his sons in the past, there are no wrist slaps. There's nothing. He's just kind of hoping that they do their own thing. Like it follows him. I don't know. It's weird. So Adonijah, because there's no response, he successfully gets Joab, the commander of the army, and Abiathar, the faithful priest, to back him as king. And Adonijah invites all of the king's sons and all of the officials except David's bodyguard, Nathan the prophet, and Solomon, the son of David and Bathsheba. So Adonijah must have known, that this was against David's wishes. Very clearly, there's a lot of palace unrest going on here. There's one clan that there's a tiny bit of people who are backing Solomon and a bunch of other people who are like, Solomon, so he must not have been that impressive. Or maybe it's just that he was a son of Bathsheba. Don't know. Nathan the prophet has Bathsheba go to David and confront him about all of this. So David decisively orders Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet to anoint Solomon king and have the ceremony in Jerusalem. So Solomon becomes king, and this is how we know Adonijah wasn't in it for a civil war. He immediately folds. He's immediately like, oh no! Okay. And he runs and grabs onto the horns of the altar. We see very clearly he doesn't want to fight. Mm-hmm. He was just hoping to sneak in there. Yeah. 1 Kings 2, David charges Solomon to walk in obedience to God and also to execute Joab, to execute Shimei, the one who taunted him as he left Jerusalem, cursed him. And this is the question that we all have. Did David see Joab and Shimei as potential threats to Solomon's throne, or were these just loose ends that David knew he had no right to deal with himself? I don't know the answer to this question. It could be both. I lean towards David knew that these were loose ends, that he knew that Joab deserved execution. He knew that Shimei deserved execution, but he knew that he also was guilty, just like he couldn't build the temple because he had blood on his hands. Mm-hmm. So Joab could have said to him, you have blood on your hands. You're going to kill me? Mm-hmm. Everything that I've done has been for you. See what I'm saying? So yes. Maybe, I don't know, or did he see them as legitimate threats to King Solomon's throne because Joab had backed Adonijah? Dunno.
Yep.
Dunno.
It's an interesting question, however.
So Solomon does end up executing Adonijah, his half-brother, because Adonijah requested to marry that woman who had kept David warm,
yes,
which he takes as a potential future threat, as if Adonijah is later going to say, well, I'm the one married to my father's final wife. He actually wanted me. Otherwise, why would I be married to her? See? Mm-hmm. So there's intrigue there. So Solomon executes him. He banishes Abiathar, the priest. He doesn't kill him. He banishes him. And Joab, who is not a fool, runs to grab onto the horns of the altar. Solomon says, come out. Joab says, no, I will die here before the Lord. I kind of love this about Joab. Solomon kills him as he holds onto the horns of the altar. So Joab gets what he wants. He wants judgment from God, not from man. Interesting.
Very.
Solomon executes Shimei, not right away, but eventually. And verse 46, the end of verse 46 tells us that the kingdom was now established in Solomon's hands. So these were potentially threats to his throne. I don't know. The politics of it all is really interesting. 1 Kings 3, Solomon. Here's where we start going downhill almost immediately. He makes an alliance, a marriage alliance with Egypt. He marries Pharaoh's daughter, brings her into Jerusalem. We see Solomon offering sacrifices to God at Gibeon. This is where the tent tabernacle was. So this is where the altar of Moses was. And God appears to Solomon. Solomon asks for wisdom. And then we're given an example of Solomon's wisdom in 1 Kings 3. 1 Kings 4, we've got the chief officials of Solomon listed. We're told of Solomon's wealth. We're given a description of his wisdom, that he wrote Proverbs, he wrote songs, he wrote about plant life and taught about plant life and animal life, all these really interesting things. 1 Kings 5. Hiram, the king of Tyre, we learn, was an ally of David. He probably had a daughter in David's harem, we're just not told. He becomes an ally of Solomon. There's probably another marriage alliance there. we indirectly learn later that there was. Solomon sources the wood needed for building the temple, cedars of Lebanon, these famous trees, and there's a record of them quarrying stone in Tyre as well. 1 Kings 6, we're told that it was the 480th year after the Israelites had come out of Egypt in the Exodus, the 4th year of Solomon on his throne, when he begins to build the temple in Jerusalem. And we're given a description of the temple, and we're told that it took 7 years to build. 1 Kings 7, it takes Solomon 13 years to build his own palace. Typical Solomon. But to be fair, his palace would have been both a public functioning and a private functioning palace. That's just the way it worked. We're told he also built a palace elsewhere for Pharaoh's daughter. He wasn't stupid. He knew that he shouldn't have been doing this, and that because it was a marriage alliance, the foreign wife was expected to keep her own religion and be provided with a way of practicing that religion legally and with the funds of Israel in Israel. That's the way ancient marriage treaties worked. Solomon knew that wasn't going to work close to the temple, so he made a palace elsewhere. And we're told that Hiram, not the king, a different Hiram, he was a half Israelite, half person from Tyre. Tyrian? I don't know how.
Tyrian?
Yes, there we go.
There it is.
He did all the temple's bronze work, and we're given a list of all the bronze articles of the temple and then the gold articles of the temple as well. And the last chapter we're going to look at, 1 Kings chapter 8, Solomon brings the Ark of the Covenant, the tent tabernacle from Gibeon, and all of its articles into the temple in Jerusalem, and the cloud of God's presence fills the temple, and Solomon dedicates the temple to God with an assembly of Israel as they gather together to celebrate what 1 Kings 8 just calls the feast. We know the feast is the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, and Solomon offers a ridiculous amount of sacrifices, of dedication. And that's that. That's how that ends. Okay, are you ready for some comments and questions?
I think so.
All right. Bill says, hi, Matlock and Corie. I like Corie's recap and themes to Judges. I'm glad you guys mentioned not forgetting what God has done for us, even in times of prosperity. It seems to go to the wayside for some in Judges' times. I also think daily gratitude in our prayers for our relationships, people in our lives, our work, etc., helps us to appreciate his ever-presence, similar to the annual festivals that Matlock mentioned. So Matlock was talking about he really likes the idea of following the church calendar, like the Christian church calendar with Easter and Christmas and all the different, because it's ways of us remembering God practically in our lives, which is true. But I think you're right, Bill. I think it's equally, if not more important, to recognize God in thankfulness in our prayers daily, because that is a very real temptation. The ancient Israelites forgot God in their prosperity. What makes us think that we will?
We're any different.
So, and we see this with King David in the Psalms, always thanking God, even when he's going through difficulties, always remembering to thank God for who he is. Mariah says, Samson, this is going back to our Judges episode. She goes, Samson reminds me of that cartoon character, Johnny Bravo. He thinks women digs him. He has false friends, etc. That's funny, Mariah. I think that's hilarious. Yes, you're right. There's this bravado surrounding Samson in the way that he's written in the Judges, where he's just he seems to be this oblivious macho bro. Yeah. You're right. I like that. Okay. Try-Fi Guy. He asks, I have a question regarding the greatest commandments. And this is referring to Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. Can love be commanded? Or is it a choice? Or is the scripture commanding how to love? Are you headed over to, what do you think?
Well, there's so many passages that talk about love. But I think as I was looking on this, 1 John 4, verse 21, Well, let's back it up. Actually, we don't have time, but if you go to 1 John 4, it's a great chapter on knowing God through love, seeing God through love, the consummation of love. Love has been perfected among us. This is verse 17. In this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us. Then it goes on. If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? Verse 21, and this commandment we have from him, that he who loves God must love his brother also.
Mm-hmm. So, yes, I think,
wrapping it down very
yeah,
quickly.
No, I agree.
But there's other verses that we could point to
but that
talk about love.
That does answer Tri-Fly Guy's question, can love be commanded or is it a choice? Yes, both. Both.
We can't say that we love God and hate.
Yes. And that's something that, so when we do find ourselves despising someone, we can still choose to not actually despise them, right? So that's when love becomes a choice, where I am going to treat you the way that God would treat you in love. I'm going to treat you in love with mercy, with truth, banking on the justice of God, because God has commanded me to love. And so, yes, love is a choice, and we must choose to do it because we are commanded to do so. So I think it's yes and yes.
Mm-hmm. All law is fulfilled in one word, even this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Love fulfills the law.
Mm-hmm. Love fulfills the law.
And it's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't. If we say we love God, then we have to love others. And the only way we can do that is through Christ, is through God. I'm trying to find here something else. There's so many verses that draw us back.
I think I'm thinking of Luke 6. You might be thinking of the same thing. Let me see. Let me see.
And I love that the very first fruit of the Spirit is love.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that grows in us as we have relationship with God. It's something that grows. We don't just get it overnight. I wish that could happen, but it's a fruit that grows. And like you said before, it's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a choice.
And it's something that we can ask God to help us with. We need to.
It's
one of the main fruits of the Spirit. Right? The first one.
Yeah.
It made me think of Luke 6, where Jesus is talking about love for your enemies. But verse 32 says, verse 32 and 33, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you?
Yeah.
Even sinners love those who love them. Yeah. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. Verse 34, and if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of your Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. And we see God doing that with David throughout David's reign. Like we've just read the Samuels, which is full of that, where to us we're like, don't you think you should probably just David right now? Like, did you? It goes against it's your own law, God. Like, you made this law. You did it. So aren't you just gonna? But we see God acting in mercy. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. Now, don't get me wrong. God is just. There are still consequences for sin, physical consequences and eternal consequences. But God is so merciful. And that's a main tenet, even if you go back into, the beginning of Joshua or in Deuteronomy or in Exodus, where God wants to be known as a God who is abundant in mercy and very slow to anger. That's how he describes himself. Thank God. Mm-hmm. But then that means that as his children, that's also how we need to be known.
That's right. Exactly. They all know we are Christians by our love. By our love. They will know we are Christians by our love.
I just think we're very
easy
far
to
away
say,
from that culturally.
Tough to do.
Very tough to do. If only the podcasters.
And read that 1 Corinthians 13 to see what love is.
Yes.
And that really puts it into perspective.
It does.
That we really need God's help.
Okay, I have another comment question from Kathy. Kathy says, I really enjoy listening to your weekend summaries. Thanks, Kathy. I focused on a comment you made, and she puts the timestamp here. This was in our video from a couple weeks ago. When you said King Solomon sacrificed his own children to pagan gods. However, I can't find any specific passage that mentions that he personally made child sacrifices. Please elaborate. Okay, this is brutal. And it's in our reading next week, but we'll do it this week because I wanted to get to your question in a timely fashion. 1 Kings 11 is where I'm going. So in 1 Kings 11, it talks about Solomon following Molech. And this is a smoking gun. So the Bible doesn't explicitly say, you're correct, it doesn't explicitly say, and Solomon sacrificed his children to Molech. But it says that without saying it. And here's what I mean. In verse 4, it says, as Solomon grew old, his wives, these are the pagan wives that followed other gods because they're treaties, peace treaties, turned his heart after other gods. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God as the heart of David his father had been. Now, if it stopped there, we could argue that this was passive. He's just letting other people worship these gods. But verse 5 says, he followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So remember that. He followed Molech, the detestable gods of the Ammonites. And then we're going to skip down to verse 7. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Okay, so building a high place for Molech and following Molech. We know from the scriptures and from history that unfortunately the worship of Molech involved child sacrifice. And the highest form of sacrifice was a royal child, unfortunately. I'm going to take you to Leviticus just to give you some passages that talk about Molech. If we go to Leviticus 18, verse 21, it says, do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, for you must not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. And we see Solomon building a high place to Molech right beside Jerusalem, right beside the Temple Mount. So sacrifices to Molech were child sacrifices. Leviticus 20, verse 2-5 talks about any Israelite or foreigner residing in Israel who sacrifices any of his children to Molech is to be put to death. The members of the community are to stone him. He's defiled my sanctuary. He's profaned my holy name. I myself will set my face against him and his family and will cut them off from their people. All who follow him are prostituting themselves to Molech. Also, you can go to 2 Kings 23, verse 10. Where it specifically says that a later king, a descendant of Solomon, a king of Judah, says that Josiah desecrated Topheth, which was in the valley of Ben Hinnom, that's right beside Jerusalem, so that no one could use it to sacrifice their son or daughter in the fire to Molech. So there had been a high place to Molech in Jerusalem from Solomon to King Josiah, where people would, I guess, routinely sacrifice their sons and daughters to Molech. So brutal stuff. So it doesn't specifically say that he did, but that was the way that you followed Molech, according to the scripture and also to history. And it says that not only did he follow Molech, he actually built a high place to Molech for the worship of Molech just east of Jerusalem. So unfortunately, Solomon does appear to be guilty of child sacrifice.
I like that it was Kathy?
Yes.
You said? I love the fact that you said something and Kathy checked it out.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the way we should be. It's like the Bereans. They always, we read about them in the New Testament that whatever somebody said, they went back and they checked it with the scriptures. That is so good, Kathy. And that's the way we need to be. We need to be students of the Bible and understand, because the Bible says so much more when we recognize the culture, when we recognize the names of some of these other, the so-called gods, the pagan gods, when we understand what they did and where they came from, it gives us a better understanding of why some of those nations had to be taken out.
Yes.
Because they had been completely turned toward evil.
Yes.
To taking the lives of the innocent. And when we look and we read, and I'm taking it down a different path, but you know, when we read about the devastation in a lot of Joshua's battles, when we hear of lives taken, what we don't understand is that they were overcome by evil. They didn't have a good life. And I don't know if I'm articulating that correctly, but they had been overcome by evil. Like we hear about the people before the flood. Yeah. Their minds were so debased that they were run and controlled by Satan.
Yeah, the Bible actually says the intent of their hearts was continually evil. So they didn't even have, like, essentially, your free will is gone at that point. You're just a sin bulldozer, a sin juggernaut.
Yeah,
You're
like a zombie.
Going and going.
A zombie of evil.
And it's a very scary thing. Romans talks about this as well. The first chapter of Romans, that we can callous our hearts. And only God can get through that. You know, only God can get through that. But there comes a point where we're too far gone. And then God's judgment comes. And that's a scary thought. Very scary. Why we need to pray we need to keep ourselves humble, but we need to pray for the people in our lives, our family and our friends and world leaders and our countries, our communities. We need to pray because we can't physically make the difference. It's the Holy Spirit of God. Yes. God can show us mercy and he can bring revival, but it has to be him. We can't force it to happen. So the regularity in prayer is something that we all have to cultivate personally. And then corporately as churches, we have to begin to cultivate regular prayer and meeting together.
If my people who are called by my name. We read that in Chronicles. It's a responsibility.
Yep.
Of those who love and follow God. We have to keep ourselves humble. And like you say, we have to turn away from our sins, humble ourselves before God, and pray for those as well around us. Absolutely. So thank you, Kathy, for being so studious.
Yes. To that point, I so appreciate it because I I try my best to remain grounded in the word and to have my conclusions be based in the word, but I am not perfect. None of us here at Bible Discovery are perfect, and I so appreciate the accountability that comes from having a community like you, especially on YouTube in the comment section. I know, like, your studiousness, Kathy, in checking that out, I appreciate it so much, because maybe there would be a time when I have misspoken, and then it gives me an opportunity to go, you know what, you were right, I misspoke here, or but then it really does push forward conversation. We can go, okay, what does that mean then? What do these scriptures mean? So it's the best. I really, really, really appreciate it. I appreciate the accountability, and I really appreciate that you caught that. I love it. I love it. So if I ever say anything weird, check it out and get back to me. And then maybe I'll be wrong, maybe I'll be right. It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, what matters is that we'll bring it back to the scriptures, and we'll find out what the scriptures say, and we'll correct the way that we think, me included, which is fabulous. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I don't think so. But thank you for letting me sit with you and listen and learn. And so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on, Mom. Isn't she great? She's awesome. All right, guys. As always, leave your comments down in the comment section below, questions for future episodes. If you are listening on a podcasting app, email me. You can go to BibleDiscoveryTV.com and find our emails there to get your comment and question through. I hope you enjoy continuing to read in Kings this coming week. Until next week, happy reading and studying.